welcome back to our first segment. As we promised you before the break, we have a very important discussion on pension reform, increments, and a host of other topics. And we hope that we'll have enough time during this segment to get all of those conversations and topics ventilated. And to have those conversations with us, we have none other than the president of the Public Service Union of Belize, himself, President Dean Flowers. We also have the president of the Belize National Teachers Union, President Elena Smith, as well as another president, so it's presidential this morning, president of the APSSM, who's none other than, she's the president of the Association of Public Service Senior Managers, and that's Miss Sharon
Fraser.
Morning. Good morning.
Good morning, ladies and
A
gentlemen.
lot of names and a lot of titles.
Presidents.
Right? So, big discussion this morning. We're having this discussion coming off last week's press conference where you guys pretty much briefed the media on a number of issues that you were hoping to make public and ventilate within the public. Let me just give each of you an opportunity to give us some opening statements and opening remarks as to where we are right now and these issues. We'll start with Sister Smith.
Well, good morning and thank you for having us. Before I get into that,
Yeah, go ahead.
let me make a clarification, because I noticed that at that press conference we were asked about the issue with the teacher, and we made it very clear that we do not condone wrongdoings.
Yeah.
But we also explained that there's a process that they must go through, and that process is explained in our rules. And so there has to be what is called due process. As a union, if a member comes to us with an issue, we represent them. And represent can either mean to ensure that the process is being followed, or that we are then taking some time to defend the teacher. The teacher in question is not a member of the union, not a BNTU member. So in explaining the process, it seemed that a lot of people misunderstood, even some of the media misunderstood what we were saying, as far as the minister is saying that BNTU were going to take up the case. That is not so. I know that the parent is very angry, but the rules are very clear that when an offense is committed, there's a process that you must follow to address those offenses. So I just wanted to clarify that.
So since the person in question is not a member of the union, then the BNTU does not represent them.
Right.
Okay.
Right. If you're not a member, though, you can still come to us and you can pay
Okay.
to get us represent you.
Okay. But that is of their own accord.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. But if you're a member, then we would travel to you. We would do everything without any cost to you because you're already a member of the union.
Let me just ask one final question on that, since you brought it up. In a matter like that, do you guys have an option, given the public backlash against such an individual, albeit alleged, an alleged incident?
Right.
Do you have the option to deny representation to that person in fear or concern of your reputation being smeared?
Well, again, as I said, there's a difference between representing to ensure that there's process and there's fairness throughout, and then defending the person. So the teacher has a right, if the member has a right to be represented.
Yeah.
Any union member has a right to be. But it doesn't mean that we will go in and defend whatever wrong they did.
Good.
All right, so it's just to ensure that, okay, the rule says that you must put the teacher on leave, you have to write and say that this is what we're charging you with, or this is the alleged crime that you've committed, investigate, we're going to charge you with this now, and then it goes through the process. So it's just to follow those things and ensure that they are going the way they should be going based on the rules.
But I also want to add something as it relates to your question in terms of representation, because a case has gone before the court in relation to a union representing its member, and that union president at that time was chastised by the court for not representing that member of that union. So we have local case law that speaks to the fact that as a member of a union, part of The benefit is representation. So you can't say, I will not represent to ensure that there is a fair process, not defending or
Yeah.
saying or condoning, but representing.
Yeah.
So like I said, just to add to what Sister Elena said, it's not that you have that option of saying, oh, well, I will not represent, because that member can in fact sue the union.
Oh, wow. So the representation, though, it comes in, and I guess this is where the conversation is headed. But the representation does not necessarily mean that they have to publicly come out and make statements. Yes.
No, it is simply about, as Sister Elena has said, ensuring that due process, that in fact the person has been given an opportunity to be heard, and follow the process as stated in the rules or any constitution or bylaw, anything as it relates to the particular union or organization.
You know, that's one of the topics that came out of last week's press conference, and that was basically prompted by a question that was asked from the media almost to the end of the press conference. But prior to that, there was an entire hour at least of other discussions and other important topics, and that's what we want to get into. You spoke specifically as it pertains to the collective bargaining agreement, and so let's start there, because we've heard from you guys, and then we've heard from the Prime Minister as well. In fact, the next day we spoke with the Prime Minister, if not the day after, where these matters are concerned pertaining to, as you would say, hardship allowance, allowances for teachers, transport allowances for teachers. And if I'm to not misinterpret his position, it's almost a strong no to these matters, to basically say that there are other things that teachers should be concerned about that should keep teachers up at night. Your thoughts?
And I hope that when they were considering his increase, that they also thought about that there are many other things that he should be considering aside from his transportation increase. And that is why we started out our press conference with an important matter, the matter of price gouging and all of those things, and that really wasn't highlighted as much as the other issues. But that may be his initial position, and we don't expect that the Prime Minister is going to be saying anything differently, because at times we make comments out of ignorance. And we have to excuse those kinds of comments. What we are saying to the government, and in particular our ministry, is that these teachers travel every day back and forth to work. And the primary school teachers have as a part of their benefits these allowances. So why must not our secondary school teachers get this allowance? You can't give half and not give the other half. And so at the time when those allowances were negotiated, we didn't have a lot of secondary school teachers as a member of our union, one. Two, we didn't have a lot of rural secondary schools. And so at the time then, it may not have been important,
Or voice.
right, if you will. But as we've seen, things have changed, and a lot of teachers are now commuting. We have a lot of teachers coming from the north to Belize City, or from the north to Belmopan, moving back and forth. So it's important that if others are getting that allowance and it's there for them, that they too benefit from that.
So are you of the view that the Prime Minister or leaders or political leaders are ignorant of the hardships that teachers face and the transportation challenges that they face, especially in some of these rural communities?
Some of them are. Of course they are. And some of them do understand, but they pretend like they don't understand. Because why? It's easier for me to get my benefits, for me to say yes to my benefits than to say yes to other people's benefits. And of course, you're going to find a lot of excuses. So what else do we have to worry about? Because in terms of our students, we are working with them. We have been doing so throughout the pandemic. We have been furnishing our classrooms. We have been feeding our students who need feeding. We have been giving them supplies when they need it. So we have been doing our part. And aside from that, we still ensure that we fight for the betterment for this country. So it's not just about our work environment, it's about country as well.
You represent the unions in the Senate, and when you are in there discussing budgeting, right now you're about to bring out the new financial budget for the fiscal year. What's the breakdown like
In terms of?
in terms of your teachers and how persons get paid, and how do you maneuver monies for transportation? How do you maneuver monies for tax? How do you maneuver monies for health workers getting paid? How do you maneuver teachers getting paid? What is the budgeting scheme like? Do you have these kind of financial discussions?
So those are things that would come to us from the government side. So that when we get the budget, we already see allocations, and those would be broad headings. So you would see salaries and you see an amount. So broad headings. So we don't have
Details.
that
Right.
sort of an involvement, if you will, in terms of how you break down each ministry's allowances that they are given.
President Flowers, you raised last week the matter of increments. You spoke in length about the demands where this is concerned, and in that same vein, you raised the issue of pension reform and a proposed pension scheme or a new pension scheme. I'm still trying to understand, and I think you raised the question last week in terms of how they both relate. How is it that they're both falling within the same discussion? My understanding is that you guys want back your increments. You're calling on the government to unfreeze these increments. On the other hand, we have leaders in the negotiation room that are saying, if that's the case, then let's discuss and agree on pension reform. Is my understanding correct?
Yes. And first of all, thanks for having us, and good morning, Belize, and of course, good morning to the members of the Public Service Union who are tuned in this morning. As it relates to increments, and yes, I did pose the question, how does one relates to the other? We believe that the government is not acting in good faith when they want to have a conversation surrounding increments and then want to tie that to pension. It's two different things. And I must state clearly that increments is governed by the public service regulations, while pensions is specifically, and there's a specific part of the Constitution that guarantees me my pension. And so I just throw that out there so that they can do some homework on that. Where our increments are concerned, we're now moving into the fourth year of increments being frozen. When we initially decided to agree to the freezing of increments way back in 2020 under the Barrow administration, it was under the understanding that if and when the financial situation of the country improves, those would be reinstated. And it is important that we even revisit that agreement, because I believe there may have been within the wording of that agreement or that circular, perhaps even some consideration for us to look at compensation. When the Briceño administration came in, they were clear, and we understood that they were clear that there would be no compensation. But also, we did not agree that increment were to be frozen for 3 years. We said, let's do this thing in phases, 1 year at a time. They said no. And they imposed something that we didn't agree to. But nonetheless, it was effected. The economy is rebounding. The super bond has been restructured, and we now have the blue bond. The government has now returned to the House after passing a $1 billion budget to pass supplementals in 1 year to the tune of $300 million. Which means that on the backs of public offices, fiscal space has been created for the government to continue the exact same thing that they criticized the Barrow administration of, borrowing in your children's name. Now, the government came to us for a savings of 51 million over 3 years. They've spent 300 million in 1 year. Am I supposed to take them seriously when they speak about austerity? And then am I supposed to take them seriously and listen to them when they say they need to keep public officers' increments frozen for an additional year with no guarantee that it will be reinstated in 2024? Because that is where the father slap in the face comes, when the Prime Minister says that he's not prepared to reinstate anything, but he's prepared to resume. And he wanted to be clear on that. And he will resume on 2 conditions. We have to have a conversation on pension reform. Pension reform has been kicked down the road by multiple administrations. It is something that we agree should have been addressed in the past, and it's something that has to be addressed. The manner in which they wish to address it is where we have the problem with. And the second condition is, of course, the issue of the performance appraisal management system, which they're saying is not objective, and in the phantom of their imagination, public officers are not deserving of an increment because it's almost automatic. Now, that's a management issue. That's an issue for the Ministry of Public Service to address, where you have incompetence heading advisory level, whether it be at the C. I don't care. That's not a problem for us. What we know is that the regulation states that I must perform, I must sit on appraisal, and I must pass an appraisal. So, in essence, I must earn that increment. So in their mind, we're not earning these increments and it's being given to us, which is utter nonsense, and speak of the ignorance of the people that lead this country sometimes.
So with this matter of increment freeze, do you all, and I guess this goes for the BNTU and for other members of the different unions, are you all still filling out appraisal forms? Do people still have to do performance objectives regardless of this freeze?
Yes.
So then what are the performance objectives like? What are your appraisals saying?
Well, it still has to be filled out, because when you think about promotions, when you think about even retirement, getting whatever benefits that are due to you, one of the things that has to be completed are these performance appraisals. In fact, I can tell you from a head of department perspective that every month, every period, there is also an in-depth performance appraisal that also has to be prepared. So it is not that, and to say that people are getting increments automatic, it's not fair. It's not fair. I represent the HODs, and I can tell you from that perspective, everybody is not getting increment every year, because some of them, their performance have not met the standard to get, so that in fact it might be that yes, there are persons, I mean, you can't control everybody, but who are just ticking off, and as Brother Dean is saying, maybe it's time for us to look at the appraisal form itself. Right now I have to be looking at an appraisal form that really does not complement, does not address how magistrates, for example, works. So I'm looking at a generic performance appraisal that speaks to a Crown Counsel standing up in court. It does not fit and suit. So it's like taking a brush and just painting right over, and it does not truly reflect. So yes, I agree, there might very well be time to sit back and look at the performance appraisal itself with a view to, but I know for me how I supplement that is within an in-depth performance appraisal that I do, where I would add, in terms of the performance, that the appraisal itself, the form itself, it's prescribed by the Public Service Regulation and the Judicial and Legal Services Regulation. It's prescribed. So that is the form that you have to use.
Yes, and I would imagine that it is, they don't want to reinstate, because they would have to reinstate the previous years of increment along with what is owed this year. Please tell me that I don't know how it works.
But before we go there, just
I'm just asking because I'm trying to figure out the difference between reinstate and resume.
just to add to what Sister Sharon said earlier, though, despite the fact that there may have been persons who would have failed the appraisal and would not qualify for an increment, all of us are losing our increments. Whether you fail, whether you pass, whether you buck, it doesn't matter. All of us, they took the decision to make it automatic across the board that
Yeah.
everybody will lose
Right.
increments for 3 years.
Right.
Yeah. So let me expound on that.
Yes, please.
It's not that. Well, that is part of the conversation that will be had and that we have been having. Government position is the following: I will not reinstate your increments, and I will keep your increments frozen for 4 years, regardless of what you're going through, and regardless of government's inability to address the inflation issues and the price gouging issues, which ultimately affect the real wages of public officers.
Right.
So it shows that clearly they're not sympathetic to those of us who earn the minimum wage or who are below that less than that living wage. So I won't restore your increments. I'll keep it frozen. I will not put you where you ought to be, which means that if I was at, let's say, 5.1, I should now be at 5.5. I will keep you at 5.1. So I'll leave you there, regardless of what your financial position is. Thirdly, I will not compensate you anything. So you last 4 years, which amounts to hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I did a calculation for one public officer and I look at the minimum wage, 2.2. That's the lowest you can go on the salary scale in the public service, based on the $5 minimum wage. If a public officer is 25 years old and has 30 years under the current retirement age, that public officer would have lost $104,000 throughout his or her career. The higher you are on that pay scale, it means that you're losing a whole lot of money. So, not reinstating me where I ought to be, not compensating me, and not being prepared to even move me up where I should have been is unacceptable. In 95 and 97, we know that there was compensation. There was another compensation, I believe, in 2008, 2009. I think there was some frozen increment. So it is only this government that is taking this irrational and position that they don't want to have a conversation. The Prime Minister looked at us and said that was a sacrifice. And because it was a sacrifice, he doesn't want to hear anything. Essentially, that is what he said. And he was very arrogant and continues to be arrogant in addressing this matter. The first thing out of his mouth on the newscast last week, well, they have the right to strike, make them strike what they want. Veering public offices. And maybe he'll get what he's asking for. And when he gets it, I hope he can deal with it. And I want to remind him that when the unions of this country stand up, it never goes well for a country. And I'm hoping that if these negotiations that we're about to embark on starting Wednesday, if they do not go in a manner that shows good faith on the part of the government and shows compromise in them understanding what we're trying to say to them, that public officers, like every other Belizeans out here, need some relief. You can't control inflation, as they keep saying. If you can't control inflation, you at least have to look at how do you cushion the impact on the quality of life of public officers and the wider public. And that is why we also spoke about the issue of price gouging and the Ministry of Agriculture Price Control Unit that needs to look at other ways how we can offer relief on essential goods to the Belizean public, while at the same time tackling the issue of the private sector, which we continue to say are not carrying their fair share of the tax burden of this country and continue to fleece the government's general sales tax. And the government doesn't want to have a conversation any at all where revenue enhancement is concerned. Do you hear them speak about revenue enhancement? All they're talking about is cut, and who are they cutting? Poor people, public officers. So I don't know how this thing will pan out, but we're trying our best to inform, educate the Belizean public that this is not about money. This is about people's survival. This is about maintaining at least one decent quality of life for public officers who are no longer your middle income owners, but are below that level of income generation and are really are within that 11% who are on the brink of poverty. 52% are with a living of poverty. And trust me, there's a whole lot of public officers in there And the rest of public officers, if you're not a CEO, if you're not an HOD, and this is not knocking my friend here, but we're really in that 11% who are on the brink. And these are the kind of conversation we want to have with the government. But instead, they want to be talking about giving the private sector $1 million over 4 years. And then there is no balance in this cost-saving, public sector cost-saving measures versus the public sector or private sector revenue enhancement to be able to balance the scale. And we're saying we're not going to
I would imagine that the $1 million that you're talking about has to do with the exemptions, correct? I would imagine the argument there would be that's economic stimulation. So you invest that, and then the private sector develops the economy, their businesses, whatever, and then that generates revenue, and you push that back into the economy, and it's for the betterment of lives across the board. The question for me, I wanted, in simple terms, a breakdown of how increments work in terms of if I'm at this certain pay scale, when I receive my increments, by what percentage or in a dollar figure would my salary increase?
The different pay scale have a different rate. However, on average, we can agree that the increment rate is about 2.5% of your salary. So based on a pay scale, you get that proportionate increase, but it's about 2.5%. Now look at that compared to the annual rate of inflation, which of course, with all due respect to the SIB, they're talking about 5-6%, but lad man, I want them to show me which good gone up, which basic good or luxurious good went up by only 5%. I mean, we can speak to basic essential goods that have gone up by 100 and 150%. So I don't know where this average come from. And I want people to stop paying attention to these politicians when they start throwing around numbers just for throwing around numbers' sake. One of the numbers that they're bragging about, 5% unemployment rate. But how does that help when 60% of us are in poverty? So essentially we're slaves. So how does that help? Does it help me to be a slave, earn a salary where I can't survive? So really and truly it means nothing if you are not ensuring that people are making a decent wage to live. And we represent public officers, and we have to defend public officers, and we have to defend their livelihoods. And it's not only their livelihood, but by extension, they're connected to private sector citizens and their families. So,
and you have to look at how do they determine those things? Because if you say that people are working, more people are working now, or less people are without work, how do you classify that? What are your measuring tips that you use to determine, well, you're working, not working, and you get to 5%? You know.
I guess my question would have been going towards the comment made about investing in the private sector, because majority of people that are employed by the government, and naturally the government has to pay salaries. So I would also, in line with your question, ask how many persons make a livable wage that would go towards being taxed. And I guess in my understanding of how the pension plans work, everybody gets paid by taxpayers' dollars. Yes. So within line with President Smith's question about how persons are being monitored in terms of how much wage they make, how many persons make enough to pay tax for persons to receive pension, and with the employment rate that they say is going up, how many persons are eligible to provide monies for pension plans? When we're talking, and I will ask that question because we're talking about pension reform. What is the union's stance on the pension reform? And I know you guys are going to have a meeting about this on Wednesday, but what are your expectations of the government, and where is your stance on it? What are you planning to say?
Well, that conversation, as President Flowers said, has been on the table for some time now. And it has to be addressed. I mean, we're not going to sit here and say that, in fact, we're not prepared to look at that, or we have not been prepared to look at it. But it is a separate conversation, and yes, it is important, because the truth of the matter is that there is one pie. People are living a little longer now, so it means that there is that burden that is placed on that pie, that one pie, to satisfy everything, right? That one pie being the consolidated funds, right? So that we have been, by means of our past collective bargaining agreements, and the way that the Pension Act is presently set up, would have put ourselves in a position where, and would have signed on at the entry into the public service to be able and entitled to a pension. We are not, like I said, we are not saying that it is not important to address it. And maybe, yes, it should have been addressed a long time ago. We have said, okay, so let's look at it. Of course, it would have to, by contractual means, be placed on those who are coming in, as opposed to those who would have already signed on. And everywhere else, in other organizations, there have been contributory pensions that have set up. I know I had read a proposed one for Karishna workers, and there are others that have, and there is nothing wrong with that. If it is I enter into an organization, and for me to get a pension means I have to contribute to it, then that is what I've signed on to, right? But the way, it is the way that is being brought to us. I've sat in many meetings with IMF personnel who have spoken about pension reform. So it's not that we are dense or we are the ostrich with our heads in the sand that don't understand that this conversation have to have. But we need to be serious about it. We need to be able to say, okay, fine, let us meaningfully look at it. Let us look at the issue as it relates to and how it is we can help. Because when we sit around those negotiations, it's not always about money, about us getting. We talk about good governance. We talk about everything. We talk about performance, improving performance of public officers. So we're getting the bang for our bucks. We're getting what it is that is supposed to. So that I hate when I hear people say, oh, the public officers, they want more money. What more money?
As it pertains to the performance of public officers, I know last week again in the Prime Minister's interview, he had stated that one of the focus that the unions need to press into is the performance of public servants and seeking to ensure that they increase performance and that they increase productivity. And it's one of the long-standing accusations against public servants that, oh, and this is not me, but people say, oh, they're lazy, oh, their attitude bad. They go in and they not put in the pound that they take out in salary. These are things, and I would imagine that some of these accusations stand true in certain areas and departments.
I want to totally
you
distance
can't-
myself
oh,
from
come
that.
on, man.
Because at the end of the day, hurricane come, public officers to come out.
I agree.
COVID come, public officers have to come out. Everything you can think of. Election come,
Yeah.
public officers have to come out. The point is that, in fact, they might not be performing the way you believe, but it's not that they're not performing. And not just that, part of the collective bargaining agreement looked at performance, so that we're struggling right now to get those performance, to get the CBA brought to an end, which included, there was only one of those proposals that dealt with salary increase, and we had 24. So what do you think the other 24 was made up of? One dealt with. salary increase.
Can I,
let me-
before you get into it, and because we're slowly running out of time, when we're talking about public service and salary increase, increment, and what have you, I guess this is a silly question, but where do the funds come from?
The consolidated fund.
Okay. And how does that equally distributed?
Well, the budget sets out where the proceeds that's coming from the consolidated funds and how it's distributed. I'm sure you've heard every year the Minister of Education or or even the Chief Justice would speak to the percentage of the
Right.
budget that is given. So it is based on what is proposed that determines the allocation to each ministry depending on need.
Right.
I can tell you that for a number of years, the budgets of various ministries have been reducing. Every year it has reduced, right? So that in fact, what has happened is that they have redistributed where the greatest need as they see it, right? And you then have to work within that budget.
that they gave you.
What they've also done in the past, as a young public officer, it used to be that we had these big vote controls and you go in and you make orders and in fact you could run the books in the red. That can't happen anymore. With the kind of budgeting that is taking place now, unless you have the funds, you can't spend. So they've immediately, with the change in the budget style, have put that control on ministries where monies cannot be spent unless they actually have it.
Yeah.
So you can't spend for the future.
Right.
You have to spend for the present, and you can only spend what is allotted to you. So month after month, sums are de-reserved and given to you, and then you have to work within that amount, deal with what is most important, cut where you need to cut. I can tell you for myself, every day I leave work, I try to make sure all the lights are turned off. I'm the HOD, but I do that because I am seeing where, in fact, we have to pay for utilities.
Right.
So it's not that we are not trying our best to ensure we save funds and work within our budget, but at the same time, we're doing the work.
Yeah.
So at least a little bit more recognition needs to be given to public officers.
I want to, and I don't, I want to hear from Mr. Flores, and I by no means want to pick a fight with public officers because there are many out there, and I personally have to deal with a lot of them, and I have family and friends that are within the public service. Then when we talk about performance, you also look at an issue that was raised back by the unions as well that has to do with vehicles and and gas and vehicles running out of the time of service. We're talking vehicles going to concerts, vehicles traveling across the border, vehicles going in directions that they don't need to go. Public servants must be held accountable for these matters as well. But talk to me.
I totally agree with you. And, I'm smiling because upon taking office, the Prime Minister said, we're not buying no vehicle. But if you hit the road right now, the alone new vehicle you see out there, right? You see the hypocrisy. You see the hypocrisy, and then to say it to us and to this nation that you're doing us a favor when we don't buy a vehicle for you. My brother, no vehicle needs a maintenance of $5,000 a month. None. But anyways, let me speak to the service that you complain about, that the people complain about. Who hire public officers? It ought to be the Public Service Commission. But you know who they hire the most public officers? The same politician, the same Prime Minister and his predecessors, who have infiltrated the public service and has taken steps to breach the commission by bringing in open vote workers left, right, and center. They have made hiring people their priority rather than creating an enabling environment for businesses to hire people. So don't come to me and complain to me about the poor service that you're saying public officers are delivering when you are the one responsible for perhaps not the best suited public officer to hold those positions. And it starts with the CEOs. We don't have the best, and this is not picking a fight with them, but that's the reality. It starts there. So I cannot be held accountable for the poor quality of officers that are brought into the service who might not be properly trained, equipped, and geared towards providing quality public service. So what the Prime Minister needs to do, what the Ministry of Public Service needs to do, is to leave the commission to do the employment. Advertise all the posts in the public service and let the best suited Belizean or CARICOM National get those posts. And if that happens, I can guarantee you that quality public service or that public service delivery, the service delivery will improve. But once you have the Prime Minister, as was the former Prime Minister and his sister, of course, used to manipulate the whole service, brother. So we don't get the best people in, but you can't come to me now and blame me for your bad. So let's start there. Let's restore how we hire people in the public service and let politicians know that they're not in job.
Yeah. Well,
Right?
you, Mr. Flowers, final question, and I'll ask for thoughts from each one of you, just quick thoughts. But at this point, it doesn't seem as if the April 1st demand will come through. If it does, then great. What's the plan for engagement leading over the next few weeks?
There is a
Engagement with the
meeting on
government leading over the next few weeks. I know there's a meeting on Wednesday. What follows that? And engagement with your members. And then what happens when April 1st comes and none of this is
Well,
realized?
Probably.
On Wednesday at 2 p.m., at a yet to be identified location, we meet with the government to start these conversations. We will continue, of course, engaging with our public officers. This morning I have some additional office visit throughout the rest of this week to try to sensitize public officers. The pressing issue here, as I stated, one, the government needs to stop the lip service and address the price, the cost of living, and maintain a decent quality, a standard of living for public officers and the wider Belizean public. Two, increments. We need to reach some middle ground on that. And three, where the pension reform is concerned, let's have a conversation, but do not think that you can impose on us. The Constitution under Section 112 is clear. Any change in that law must be better than what exists. 112B. All right? So the IMF is saying everybody have to contribute, but they're prepared to exempt, I believe, those 50 and above. That is their recommendation. And I want to state on TV this morning that I asked a point-blank question to the IMF representatives in that room. Did you, as part of your recommendations, recommended the dismissal of 3,000 public officers? And his response was an emphatic no. And so I want to say to the Prime Minister, stop misleading the Belizean public and stop creating this fear-mongering and using these fear-mongering tactics. The records are there, his response is there, and that perhaps the Prime Minister was confused. That was his response. And I speak straight, and I speak truth. So that is the way forward. Continue the engagement, good faith conversation. We to come with clean hands with the government to say to them, you cannot continue to put pain upon the working class of this country. You also need to start sharing that burden with the private sector as well, where revenue enhancement is concerned. To this day, I want the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance to come and tell me what's the tax leakages that we continue to have to deal with, even though we have invested in excess of $28 million to amalgamate the tax services department. Nothing has improved there. Nothing has improved there. I want to recognize the Custom and Excise Department. I think that they are doing well in terms of their numbers. But what improvement have we seen where compliance, where registration is concerned, where more efficiency and greater revenue generation is concerned, where the Belize Tax Services Department? As a matter of fact, despite the investment, it has gotten worse. The entire project team has resigned. There is numerous requests for transfer and resignations out of that department, and yet they are not doing anything to enhance revenue and enhance that department. People are still clamoring for their tax return after 5 and 6 years. And what are they doing? So, look, there's a lot that needs to be discussed with this administration, and a lot that will be discussed. And as a leader, I will not allow any administration to think that they can simply come and impose more pain on the people that I represent.
Thank you very much. So passionate and well spoken as usual. Sister Fraser, final thoughts, and then Sister Smith.
Well, Brother Dean has said a whole lot.
As usual.
So I am hopeful. I can tell you what will happen beyond Wednesday. I am looking forward to that meeting. I'm hoping that it is very productive. And as Brother Dean is saying, we go with clean hands and hope for the best.
Well, we had a meeting on Friday to discuss Proposal 22. You know that's a part of the CBA that we need to finalize. That meeting, we have some things that we need to work on and to consider going forward. So we expect that will be finalized soon. In terms of what we expect going forward, we must remember that we pay taxes as well. If you want to look at reforming pension, you have to also look at tax reform. And that has been our position, that we have to look at the tax because we pay 25% off the top. We don't even see that. I mean, before we get our pay, that is out, while others are paying 6%. So we like to talk about, the businesses are suffering, but we end up paying the 100% increase in goods and all of those kinds of things. We expect that the government team is going to be coming to those meetings with a collaborative mindset. You're not coming in there to dictate and say, we will do this, and you do what you did the last time and just go and pass a law. Because that is not how we should be working. We should, if we say we are partners, then we must be collaborating with one another and look out for the best for our membership as well as the people of Belize. Because at the end of the day, those we represent go and vote as well. Those are in their constituencies. So we know that our people are on edge, our people are awaiting the signal, and we have to ensure that we do our best to provide them with information, we educate them, and we know when that time is right to provide that signal to them.
Perfect. Well,
Presidents.
there you had it. Dean Flowers, President Eliana Smith, and President Sharon Fraser from the public service, all representatives, members of public service and public servants, having a detailed conversation with us. Of course, we can't spend an hour and a half as we would love to, or 2 hours having this discussion, but we do want to thank them for joining us, thank our viewers for tuning into this segment. What we'll do right now, we'll take a break, and when we come back, we have our final conversation for the morning. So you don't want to miss that with the University of Belize.